A millionaire marries a mysterious black woman, but hidden family photos reveal an unexpected connection. What surprising truth will these images uncover? And if you cherish your family and love videos like this, subscribe to our channel to have 10 years of luck in your life. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel buzzed with New York's elite society. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the black tie affair, where waiters weaved through crowds carrying champagne flutes on silver trays. Ethan Reynolds stood near the bar, his tailored tuxedo marking him as one of the evening's most eligible bachelors. Despite his outward appearance of success, a sense of emptiness gnawed at him. Ethan checked his watch, another hour of mandatory socializing ahead. As the CEO of Reynolds Enterprises, these events were part of his routine, but tonight felt particularly hollow. He observed the familiar faces around him. Business partners laughing at rehearsed jokes, socialites competing for attention, and young entrepreneurs hoping to catch his eye for potential investments. His assistant, Marcus, approached with another potential business contact, but Ethan waved him off. He'd closed enough deals for one evening. The truth was, at 35, Ethan had everything society deemed important: wealth, power, influence. Yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was missing. He made his way through the crowd, nodding at acquaintances, but avoiding lengthy conversations. The fake smiles and shallow discussions about stock portfolios and summer homes in the Hamptons had lost their appeal years ago. Even his recent acquisition of a tech startup, which had dominated financial headlines, felt meaningless in the grand scheme of things. The evening dragged on until a movement near the entrance caught his attention. A woman in a deep blue evening gown entered the ballroom. Unlike the other guests who seemed to demand attention, she carried herself with quiet confidence. Her dark hair was elegantly styled, but it was her eyes that captured Ethan's interest. They held intelligence and a hint of mystery. Without thinking, Ethan found himself moving toward her. As he got closer, he noticed she was studying a painting on the wall, not the usual behavior at these events where networking took precedence over art appreciation. She stood before a classical piece, her head tilted slightly as she examined the brushwork. "The artist spent 3 years perfecting this piece," Ethan said, stepping beside her. "Though personally, I think his earlier works showed more passion." She turned to him, a slight smile playing at her lips. "I disagree. The technical refinement in this period actually enhanced his emotional expression. Look at how he's handled the light here." She gestured to a particular section of the painting. Her name was Chloe Davis, she explained, and she worked as an art historian. Their conversation flowed naturally from art to literature, then to travel and philosophy. For the first time in years, Ethan found himself engaged in a genuine discussion at one of these events. As the evening progressed, they gravitated toward the terrace. The Manhattan skyline provided a stunning backdrop as they continued talking. The cool night air offered a welcome respite from the stuffiness of the ballroom. Chloe leaned against the stone balustrade, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. "These events usually feel like business transactions," Ethan admitted. "Everyone wants something." "And what do you want, Mr. Reynolds?" Chloe asked, her question carrying more weight than casual conversation. Before he could answer, a gust of wind caught her wrap, and Ethan reached out to catch it. Their hands touched briefly, and an unexpected current of electricity passed between them. The moment stretched, filled with unspoken possibility. "Perhaps coffee?" Ethan suggested. "Somewhere without all this pretense." Chloe considered him for a moment, then reached into her clutch and wrote her number on a business card. "Tomorrow afternoon. There's a small cafe on Madison Avenue." She named the place and time. As she turned to leave, Ethan felt something he hadn't experienced in years: anticipation. For once, the emptiness that usually accompanied these events was replaced by a sense of possibility. He watched her disappear back into the crowd, already looking forward to tomorrow. The night ended with Ethan feeling more alive than he had in months. As his driver brought the car around, he found himself remembering small details: the way she gestured when making a point, her genuine laugh at his observations, the intelligent spark in her eyes when they debated art history. Something about Chloe Davis was different, and Ethan knew his life was about to change. The auction house hummed with anticipation as Ethan guided Chloe through the maze of display cases. Sotheby's autumn auction featured an impressive collection of American historical artifacts, and Ethan had secured front-row seats. He watched Chloe from the corner of his eye, noting how she seemed to shrink into herself despite her elegant attire. Her usual confidence appeared dimmed in this setting. "Are you all right?" Ethan asked quietly, placing a gentle hand on her elbow. "You seem uncomfortable." Chloe straightened her spine, composing herself. "Just feeling a bit out of place. This is more your world than mine." Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the wealthy collectors examining rare pieces through jewelers' loupes. They had been dating for 3 weeks now, and each moment together revealed new layers to their connection. Yet here, surrounded by artifacts of old money and heritage, Ethan sensed a shift in Chloe's demeanor. She who usually spoke with such passion about art history now seemed guarded, almost wary. The auctioneer began the proceedings, his voice carrying through the elegant room. Ethan participated in several early lots, securing a Civil War-era pocket watch and a collection of letters from a prominent 19th century author. Chloe watched him bid with practiced ease, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Halfway through the auction, a lot caught Ethan's attention. Item 147, a collection of photographs and personal effects from the Reynolds family estate, circa 1890 to 1920. His family name sparked immediate interest. He hadn't known these items would be up for auction. "I didn't realize your family had sold items to the auction house," Chloe commented, her voice carefully neutral. "Neither did I," Ethan replied, already raising his paddle. The bidding was brief. Few could compete with his determination to reclaim his family's history. Minutes later, the wooden box was brought to their table. Ethan opened it carefully, revealing dozens of sepia-toned photographs, letters, and small personal items. Each piece offered a glimpse into his family's past. Photographs of the original Reynolds mansion, social gatherings, family portraits. Chloe leaned in despite her earlier reluctance, her historian's curiosity evidently piqued. As they sorted through the collection, Ethan's hand froze on a particular photograph. The image showed a young woman in Victorian dress, standing in the gardens of what he recognized as his family's old estate. But it wasn't the setting that caught his attention. It was the woman's face. The resemblance to Chloe was uncanny. The same delicate features, the same proud posture, even the same slight tilt of the head he'd come to know so well. "Chloe," he said slowly, holding up the photograph. "This woman, she could be your twin." The color drained from Chloe's face as she stared at the image. Her fingers trembled slightly as she took the photograph from him. "What's the date on this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. 1893, Ethan read from the back. "The woman's name isn't listed, but these are definitely the Reynolds estate gardens." He watched as Chloe's eyes fixed on the age, something unreadable passing across her face. "Do you know something about this?" Chloe handed the photograph back quickly, as if it burned her fingers. "It's just a remarkable coincidence," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Old photographs can play tricks on us. The lighting, the pose, they can create similarities that aren't really there." The rest of the auction passed in a blur of tension. Ethan noticed how Chloe avoided looking at the box of photographs again, how she kept checking her phone as if hoping for an excuse to leave. When the final lot was sold, she practically jumped from her seat. "I should go," she said, gathering her things. "I have an early meeting tomorrow." "Let me drive you home," Ethan offered, but she was already shaking her head. "I'll take a cab. Thank you for today." She kissed his cheek quickly and was gone before he could protest, leaving him alone with a box of old photographs and a growing sense that there was much more to Chloe Davis than she had revealed. The morning light filtered through the windows of Ethan's penthouse office as he stared at the old photograph, his mind racing with questions. After a week of Chloe's evasive behavior and canceled plans, he'd finally convinced her to meet him for lunch. The tension between them had grown palpable, stretching like a taut wire ready to snap. When Chloe arrived at the restaurant, her usual graceful confidence seemed dimmed. Ethan waited until they'd ordered before placing the photograph on the table between them. "I think we need to talk about this," he said quietly. The resemblance is too strong to be coincidence, Chloe. Chloe's fingers traced the edge of the photograph, her eyes downcast. What do you want me to say, Ethan? That I've been hiding something? That I'm not who you think I am? Her voice carried a weight of sadness he hadn't heard before. I want the truth, Ethan replied. Whatever it is, we can handle it together. Chloe took a deep breath. My past is complicated. There are things about my family, about where I come from, that I've spent years trying to understand. But I'm not ready to share everything yet. Please understand. Her response only fueled Ethan's determination to uncover the truth. Over the next few days, he immersed himself in his family's history, spending hours in the Reynolds family library, poring over old documents and journals. The photograph had opened a door to a past filled with whispered secrets and carefully hidden truths. In a dusty corner of the library, Ethan discovered his great-grandfather's private journals. The entries from the 1890s revealed a society torn by class divisions and prejudice. References to a forbidden romance appeared repeatedly, though names were carefully omitted. The more Ethan read, the more he recognized patterns of concealment and shame threading through his family's history. During a Sunday dinner at the Reynolds mansion, Ethan observed his father, Richard Reynolds, more carefully than usual. Richard maintained an air of old money sophistication, but there was something calculated in the way he inquired about Chloe, something sharp beneath his polite smile. This new woman you're seeing, Richard said, swirling his brandy. Davis, isn't it? I don't recall the family name from our circles. Not everyone worth knowing comes from our circles, Dad. Ethan replied, noting the slight tightening around his father's eyes. Of course not, son. But we have certain responsibilities to uphold. The Reynolds name carries weight in this city. We can't afford to be careless with our associations. The carefully chosen words carried volumes of meaning. Ethan felt a surge of anger at the implied prejudice. Chloe is brilliant, accomplished, and genuinely good. Isn't that what should matter? Richard placed his glass down with deliberate care. There are things you don't understand about family legacy, Ethan. Sometimes protecting that legacy means making difficult choices. Or maybe it means challenging outdated prejudices, Ethan countered, watching his father's expression harden. The conversation ended there, but the undercurrent of tension remained. Later that evening, as Ethan prepared to leave, his mother caught his arm. Her eyes held a mix of concern and something else. Was it guilt? Be careful, darling, she whispered. Your father means well, but some paths are better left unexplored. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. Ethan drove home that night with his thoughts in turmoil. The weight of unspoken words and hidden histories pressed down on him. His phone buzzed with a message from Chloe. I miss you, but I'm afraid of what happens next. He pulled over to respond. Whatever comes next, we face it together. No more secrets. Her reply came hours later. Some secrets protect the people we love. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Chloe's small apartment as she sat with her mother, Sarah Davis, surrounded by old photographs and letters she'd kept hidden for decades. The revelation had started with a simple question about her father, but the answer had unraveled everything Chloe thought she knew about her family. I never meant to lie to you, Sarah began, her hands trembling as she opened an old shoebox. When I said your father abandoned us, it wasn't the whole truth.
He didn't know about you.
I never told him I was pregnant. Chloe watched her mother withdraw a worn envelope, her heart pounding.
Why?
Who was he? Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she removed a photograph, one that made Chloe's breath catch. It showed her mother, young and radiant, standing beside a handsome man in front of the Reynolds estate. His name was James Reynolds, Ethan's uncle. The truth spilled out like water from a broken dam. Sarah had worked as a housekeeper at the Reynolds estate during college. She and James had fallen deeply in love, keeping their relationship secret due to their different social standings. When Sarah discovered she was pregnant, James had been away on business. Before she could tell him, Richard Reynolds, James's older brother and Ethan's father, had discovered their relationship. Richard made it clear that a relationship between James and me would destroy both families, Sarah explained, wiping tears. He offered me money to leave quietly, to spare everyone the scandal. I refused the money, but I left anyway. 2 weeks later, I learned that James had died in a car accident abroad. Chloe sat in stunned silence, pieces of her life suddenly shifting into new patterns. So Ethan is your cousin, Sarah finished. I never told you because I wanted to protect you from the pain, from the rejection I faced. I changed my name, moved across the city, built a new life. But I kept everything, every letter, every photograph, every memory of James. The revelation left Chloe reeling. Her connection to Ethan wasn't just romantic. It was bound by blood, complicated by decades of family history and prejudice. The photograph from the auction house suddenly made sense. The woman had been James's grandmother, Chloe's great-grandmother. Does Richard know about me? Chloe asked, her voice barely audible. Sarah shook her head. I don't think so. He knew about James and me, but not about my pregnancy. I was barely showing when I left. Chloe stood abruptly, pacing the small living room. I have to tell Ethan. He deserves to know. Chloe, wait. Sarah caught her daughter's hand. Think about what this means. The Reynolds family, they're different from us. Richard's prejudices haven't changed. This truth could destroy everything Ethan believes about his family. The weight of the secret pressed down on Chloe's chest. She thought about Ethan's smile, his kindness, the way he looked at her like she was something precious. How would he react knowing they shared blood? That his father had effectively banished her mother, unknowingly separating him from his cousin Beth. Or she was even born? Her phone buzzed, a message from Ethan. Dinner tonight? I miss you. Chloe stared at the screen, tears blurring her vision. How could she face him now? How could she tell him that their love story was tangled in a web of family secrets and old wounds? That the very blood in their veins made their relationship impossible? I need time, she whispered, more to herself than her mother. Time to figure out how to tell him, how to make him understand. Sarah gathered her daughter in her arms, holding her as she hadn't since Chloe was small. Sometimes love means making impossible choices, she said softly. Whatever you decide, I'm here. In his office at Reynolds Enterprises, Ethan struggled to focus on work, his mind constantly drifting to Chloe's increasingly distant behavior. Their once flowing conversations had become stilted, filled with careful pauses and unfinished thoughts. Every attempt to bridge the growing gap between them seemed to push her further away. After another canceled dinner plan, Ethan decided to surprise her at the museum where she worked. He found her in the Renaissance wing, cataloging new acquisitions. The sight of her, completely absorbed in her work, made his heart ache with a familiar longing. I thought we could talk, he said softly, causing her to startle. Really talk, Chloe. No more dancing around whatever's troubling you. Chloe's hands trembled as she set down her tablet. Ethan, she began, but the words seemed to catch in her throat. I've been doing some research, he continued, moving closer, about my family's history, about the patterns of prejudice and social divisions. I know my father represents a worldview that I don't share. Whatever's holding you back, whatever you're afraid of, we can face it together. His vulnerability seemed to crack something in Chloe's carefully maintained facade. It's not that simple, she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. Your father's prejudices aren't just about social class. There are things about my connection to your family that would change everything. Nothing could change how I feel about you, Ethan insisted, reaching for her hand. Chloe allowed the contact for a moment before pulling away. You can't know that. Some truths are too heavy to bear. The pain in her voice struck him deeply. Then help me understand. Whatever it is, we'll find a way through it. In that quiet museum corner, surrounded by centuries of art, Ethan opened up about his own insecurities. He spoke about the pressure of being a Reynolds, about the suffocating weight of family expectations. He revealed his fear that he would never find someone who saw him for who he was, not what he represented. When I'm with you, he said, his voice rough with emotion, I feel real. Not like the CEO, Not like the Reynolds heir, just like myself. That's worth fighting for, Chloe. His words hit her like physical blows. She turned away, pressing her hands against her eyes. And what if who I am makes that impossible? What if my very existence threatens everything you've ever known about your family? Before Ethan could respond, his phone buzzed insistently. His father's name flashed on the screen. Richard Reynolds never called during business hours unless it was urgent. The interruption created a moment of tension, heavy with unspoken words. "You should take that," Chloe said quietly. "Your father wouldn't call without reason." Ethan hesitated, torn between answering his father and pursuing this rare moment of openness with Chloe. As he reached for his phone, he saw something shift in Chloe's expression, a decision being made. "I need to tell you something," she began, her voice barely audible. But before she could continue, a museum curator appeared, calling for her assistance with an urgent matter. The moment shattered. Chloe straightened her shoulders, professional mask sliding back into place. "I have to go," she said, already stepping away. "Will tea. Alk later." Ethan watched her disappear among the artwork, his father's call still buzzing in his hand, feeling like he'd just missed grasping something essential, something that, once lost, might prove impossible to reclaim. The confrontation between Ethan and his father erupted in the Reynolds family study, a room steeped in generations of tradition. Richard Reynolds stood behind his mahogany desk, his posture rigid with disapproval as he faced his son. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows, highlighting the tension between them. "I've had our family investigators look into Ms. Davis's background," Richard announced, his voice carrying the weight of authority he'd wielded for decades. "Her family history raises serious concerns. She's not suitable for someone of your position." Ethan's anger flared immediately. "You had her investigated? Without my knowledge? That's completely unacceptable." Richard removed his reading glasses deliberately, placing them on the desk. "As CEO of Reynolds Enterprises and heir to this family's legacy, your choices impact more than just yourself. This woman, her background is questionable at best. There are inconsistencies in her family records that suggest " "Stop," Ethan interrupted, his voice sharp. "Chloe is brilliant, accomplished, and genuine. She's more real than anyone in our social circle. The fact that she doesn't come from money doesn't make her less worthy." Richard's expression hardened. "This isn't about money, Ethan. There are traditions, expectations that come with our name. The Reynolds family has maintained its position in society through careful choices, strategic alliances. We can't afford to " "To what, Dad? To allow someone beneath us into the family? Your prejudices are exactly what's wrong with our world. Times have changed, even if you refuse to see it." The older man circled his desk slowly, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "You think I'm being old-fashioned? Prejudiced? I'm trying to protect our family's reputation, our legacy. Everything I've done, everything your grandfather built, could be compromised by one impulsive choice." Their argument escalated, words becoming weapons that struck at the heart of their relationship. Ethan challenged decades of ingrained prejudice, while his father defended a system of social hierarchy that had defined their family for generations. "I love her," Ethan declared firmly. "Your approval would mean something to me, but I don't require it. Times have changed, Dad. Love matters more than social status or family connections." Richard's face flushed with anger. "Love? You sound like a naive schoolboy. Do you think love will protect our company's reputation? Maintain our business relationships? Preserve the trust our investors have placed in us?" Neither man noticed Chloe standing in the doorway, having arrived for a dinner she'd finally agreed to attend. She heard every word, saw the fury in Richard's face, witnessed the pain in Ethan's eyes as he defended their relationship. The sound of her heel against the hardwood floor alerted them to her presence. Both men turned, their expressions shifting rapidly. Ethan's to concern, Richard's to carefully controlled disdain. "Ms. Davis," Richard acknowledged coldly. "I believe this is a private family matter." Chloe straightened her spine, years of carrying her own secret giving her strength. "Mr. Reynolds, I heard enough to understand your position. You believe I'm a threat to your family's legacy. The truth is, you don't know the half of it." She turned to Ethan, her eyes filling with tears. "I can't be the reason you destroy your relationship with your father. I can't be the cause of this divide. Some things, some truths are better left buried." Before either man could respond, she turned and fled the study. Her footsteps echoed through the grand hallway, each one carrying her further from the man she loved and the family's secret she couldn't are. Evil. Ethan moved to follow her, but his father's voice stopped him. "Let her go, son. It's better this way." The look Ethan gave his father carried years of accumulated disappointment.
No, Dad.
"Your way isn't better. It's just easier. And I'm done taking the easy path." The next week passed in a blur of unanswered calls and empty spaces where Chloe used to be. Ethan threw himself into work, but every corner of New York seemed to hold memories of their time together. The art gallery where they first discussed Renaissance paintings, the small cafe where she always ordered chai tea, the park bench where they spent hours talking about their dreams, all now served as painful reminders of her absence. Finally, after days of silence, Ethan decided to visit the museum during her lunch break. He found her favorite spot empty, but a colleague informed him that Chloe had taken personal leave. Refusing to give up, he drove to her apartment, where the doorman reluctantly revealed she hadn't been home in days. Growing increasingly worried, Ethan remembered a detail from one of their early conversations, a small bookstore in Brooklyn where Chloe said she went to think when life became overwhelming. The bell above the door chimed as he entered the dusty shop, and there she was, curled in an oversized armchair in the poetry section, looking smaller and more vulnerable than he'd ever seen her. "You're not an easy woman to find," he said softly, approaching her chair. Chloe didn't look up from her book, but her fingers tightened on the pages. "I needed space to think, to figure out what's right." "And have you?" Ethan asked, kneeling beside her chair. "Because I've been doing some thinking too, about what matters in life, about what I'm willing to fight for." Finally, she met his eyes, and the pain he saw there made his chest tighten. "I don't deserve the way you defend me," she whispered. "You don't know everything about me, about my connection to your family. If you did, then tell me," he urged. "Whatever it is, we can face it together." Chloe closed her book, her hands trembling. "I've spent my whole life feeling like I didn't belong anywhere. Like I was carrying this weight of secrets that defined me. Then I met you, and for the first time, I felt like I'd found home." Her voice broke on the last word. "You are home," Ethan insisted. "Whatever you're carrying, whatever secret you think will change everything, it doesn't change what we have." "But it does," she countered, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "Your father's right about one thing. I will change everything. Not because of my social status, but because of who I am. Because of blood and history and choices made before either of us was born." Ethan reached for her hand, relieved when she didn't pull away. "Then change everything. Maybe some things need to change. My father's prejudices, this rigid social structure, these unwritten rules about who belongs where, maybe it all needs to be torn down and rebuilt." The afternoon light filtered through dusty windows, casting a gentle glow over them both as they sat in that quiet corner of the bookstore. Chloe leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Scared of losing you, scared of hurting you, scared of what happens when the truth comes out." "I'm not going anywhere," Ethan promised. "Whatever truth you're holding, whatever storm is coming, we'll weather it together." Ethan and Chloe embarked on their journey of discovery on a crisp autumn morning, starting at the old Reynolds estate in upstate New York. The mansion stood as a testament to generations of family history, its Victorian architecture preserved through careful maintenance. As they walked the grounds, each step revealed another layer of their intertwined past. The first revelation came in the estate's private cemetery. Chloe led Ethan to a simple headstone, partially hidden behind more elaborate family monuments. The name, James R. Reynolds, was carved in weathered stone, with dates marking a life cut tragically short. Ethan recognized it as his uncle's grave, the brother his father rarely mentioned. "Your Uncle James," Chloe began, her voice steady despite her trembling hands, "was more than just another Reynolds. He was a man who dared to love across social boundaries. He fell in love with a young woman who worked at the estate, my mother." Understanding dawned in Ethan's eyes as Chloe continued the story. She explained how her mother, Sarah Davis, had worked as a housekeeper while attending college. How she and James had fallen deeply in love, keeping their relationship hidden from the judgmental eyes of society. When Richard discovered their secret, he had systematically worked to separate them. Their next stop was a small apartment building in Brooklyn, where Sarah had moved after leaving the Reynolds estate. The neighborhood had changed over the decades, but the building stood as a silent witness to the choices that had shaped their lives. Inside her mother's apartment, Sarah shared the tangible pieces of the past, letters, photographs, and mementos that proved the depth of her love for James. The most powerful revelation came when they visited the public library's archives. There, among yellowed newspapers, they found articles about James's death in a car accident abroad. The dates aligned perfectly with the time Sarah had discovered she was pregnant with Chloe. The truth hit Ethan with full force. Chloe wasn't just someone he loved. She was his cousin, a blood relation he never knew existed. Each location they visited added another piece to the puzzle. The small church where James and Sarah had secretly met, the park bench where they had shared dreams of a future together, the cafe where Sarah had waited in vain for James to return from his final trip. All these places held echoes of a love story that paralleled their own. At sunset, they found themselves in the estate's rose garden, where the photograph that had started their investigation had been taken. The same architectural features remained, though the roses were different now. Ethan traced the path where his grandmother had stood in that old photograph, the woman whose features had passed down through generations to Chloe. "Our families weren't always separated by prejudice," Ethan observed, studying the garden's layout. "There was love here once, a love strong enough to challenge social boundaries. History is repeating itself, Chloe, but this time we have a chance to write a different ending." Sarah joined them in the garden, bringing more family photographs and documents. Together, they pieced together the full story of how the Reynolds family's rigid social hierarchy had torn apart not just one love story, but had rippled through generations, creating wounds that had never properly healed. As the day drew to a close, Ethan and Chloe sat on the mansion steps, surrounded by the physical evidence of their shared history. The truth was finally out in the open. Their love wasn't just challenged by present-day prejudices, but was entangled in a complex web of family connections that neither had imagined. At their apartment, Ethan and Chloe spent hours discussing how to move forward with their newfound knowledge. The weight of their family connection hung between them, but rather than driving them apart, it strengthened their resolve to break the cycle of prejudice that had haunted both families for generations. "We can't let history repeat itself," Chloe said, pacing their living room. "Your father needs to know the truth, not just about us, but about everything. About James and my mother, about the choices that were made, about who I really am." Ethan watched her move, remembering how his father had always controlled family narratives through carefully orchestrated social events. "Then we'll do it his way," he decided. "The annual Reynolds Charity Gala is next week. Everyone who matters to the family will be there. It's the perfect opportunity to reveal everything." The preparation for the gala consumed their days. Chloe worked with her mother to organize their evidence, letters, photographs, legal documents that proved her connection to the Reynolds family. Sarah agreed to attend the gala, her first time returning to Reynolds' social circles since leaving decades ago. The night of the gala arrived with an electric tension in the air. The Reynolds mansion's ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and old money. Society's elite mingled, unaware they were about to witness the dismantling of carefully constructed social barriers. Ethan entered with Chloe on his arm, her presence drawing immediate attention. She wore a deep blue gown that echoed the one from their first meeting, but now she carried herself with newfound strength. The whispers started immediately. The same people who had praised her charm weeks ago now eyed her with suspicion, Richard's disapproval having rippled through their social circle. Richard Reynolds stood at the far end of the ballroom, his face darkening when he saw them. The crowd parted as he approached, sensing the impending confrontation. But before he could reach them, Sarah Davis entered the ballroom. Her appearance caused Richard to stop mid-stride, the color draining from his face as he recognized her. "Sarah," he breathed, his carefully maintained composure cracking. "What are you doing here?" The ballroom fell silent as Sarah approached, her head held high. "I think you know why I'm here, Richard. It's time for the truth to come out. All of it." Chloe stepped forward, standing between her mother and Richard. The resemblance between her and the woman in the old photograph was unmistakable in that moment, drawing gasps from those who remembered the Reynolds family's past. "Uncle James never knew," Ethan said, his voice carrying through the silent room. "He never knew he had a daughter. You made sure of that, didn't you, Dad?" The tension in the ballroom reached a breaking point. Decades of secrets, lies, and carefully maintained social barriers teetered on the edge of collapse. Richard Reynolds stood frozen, facing not just an unwanted romance, but the consequences of choices made long ago. Choices that had shaped lives, separated families, and created wounds that had festered for generations. The tense silence in the ballroom broke with the arrival of Eleanor Matthews, Richard's elderly aunt and the family's oldest living member. She moved through the crowd with surprising agility, her silver hair gleaming under the chandeliers. In her hands, she clutched a weathered leather portfolio that drew everyone's attention. "I've carried this burden long enough," Eleanor announced, her voice strong despite her age. "When James died, he left this with me for safekeeping. He knew Richard would try to destroy it." She opened the portfolio, removing a sealed envelope. "It's a letter, written the day before his accident, addressed to Sarah Davis." Richard stepped forward, reaching for the letter, but Eleanor held it away.
No, Richard.
"You've controlled this family's narrative long enough. James knew about the baby, Sarah. He was coming back for you when the accident happened." The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. Sarah's hands trembled as Eleanor handed her the letter. Inside, James's words confirmed everything: his love for Sarah, his joy about becoming a father, his plans to defy social conventions and build a life together. The letter was dated one day before his fatal accident. "I had a right to protect our family's reputation," Richard defended, but his voice lacked conviction. The weight of his choices visibly pressed down on him as he faced not just Chloe and Sarah, but the gathered witnesses to his decades of deception. "Protect," Ethan challenged. "You destroyed lives, Dad. You separated a father from his child. You forced a woman to raise her daughter alone rather than risk your precious social standing. And now you're trying to do it again, pushing away your own niece because you're afraid of what people might think." The truth hung in the air, impossible to ignore. The similarities between past and present became stark. 2 generations of Reynolds men falling in love across social boundaries. But this time, the story could have a different ending. Eleanor stepped between Richard and the others, her presence commanding attention. "Our family's true legacy isn't in our social status or our wealth," she declared. "It's in the love stories we've tried to bury, the connections we've denied. James and Sarah's love was real. And now, their daughter stands before us, living proof that love transcends the barriers we create." The impact of Eleanor's words rippled through the crowd. Longtime family friends began sharing their own memories of James, his kindness, his rejection of social prejudices, his desire for a more inclusive world. The carefully maintained facade of Reynolds' family superiority began to crack. Richard Reynolds stood alone, watching as his carefully constructed world shifted. The choice before him was clear: continue defending old prejudices or embrace the chance for redemption. In his silence, Chloe approached him, offering the photograph that had started everything. "I'm not asking you to forget the past," she said softly. "I'm asking you to help write a better future. One where love matters more than status, where family means more than reputation." The moment stretched, heavy with possibility. Then, slowly, Richard took the photograph, studying the face of the woman who looked so much like the niece he'd never known. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of recognition and regret. "James would be proud of you both," he said quietly. "And I've been wrong."
About so many things.
The admission marked more than just acceptance. It represented the beginning of healing for both families. As the story spread through the ballroom, other secrets emerged, other stories of love crossing social boundaries. The Reynolds family legacy was being rewritten, not through carefully maintained prejudices, but through the courage to embrace love in all its forms. The night ended not with scandal, as many had feared, but with reconciliation. Ethan and Chloe's love story became not just their own, but a bridge between past and present, a chance to heal old wounds and build a future where love truly did conquer all.